Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa.
Welcome into another episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, college. I'm your host, Brian Ralph, joined as always by my co-host, Riley Davis. Connor Hope is out tonight. He is enjoying some basketball out. He's in Seattle. He's just enjoying himself. But we have Riley here. We have a special guest, Terrence Oglesby, on later to talk about the ACC Big Ten Challenge. But we took a break last week, Riley, for Thanksgiving. We all celebrated the holiday with our families, which is very, very nice. Spent a lot of time on the couch in stretchy pants, eating food and watching basketball. We hadn't had a chance to really talk about the Feast Week games, so that's where we'll start. And I know we've had some games since then, but everybody, it felt like at least all the top teams or majority of the top teams played significant matchups during Feast Week in games that told us a lot about who teams are. The AP poll came out, started this week, and you had 5 teams that jumped at least 7 spots and 5 teams that fell at least 7 spots. This is the one time of year you see that kind of movement because we get to really establish who things are, who teams are, how that pecking order is going to shake out. So, Riley, I ask you the very simple question. What is your biggest takeaway from Feast Week?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the AP poll and all these teams that are flying up. It reminds me, let me think, I guess it would have been 3 years ago now when Michigan won the battle for Atlantis and beat what ended up being a really bad UNC team with Cole Anthony, Garrison Brooks, and beating Gonzaga. And I think they went from unranked to maybe like 3 or 4. And
there was a push to have them go unranked to 1. I remember that.
Yep. And usually I'm pretty cynical to raising teams that high. But I don't know. This year I'm like, whatever, man. I'm just going to get in the spirit of it and overreact as well. With our heat check poll, I moved Purdue from unranked into my top 10. I moved UConn way up to my top 10. I mean, I think those are the 2 biggest risers. With Purdue in particular, like their freshman guards have been incredible. I think like Braden Smith is someone whose live dribble passing I was not expecting at all, and is perfect fit for what Matt Painter wants to do. But I'll mainly lean into UConn as a team that I think like I just cannot get over how good they look offensively, just especially compared to what Hurley teams have been in the past. And yeah, you mentioned being stretched out on the couch. I want to give a special shout out to my father-in-law and his wife, who have a nice little like 65-inch TV right outside the guest room. Spent a lot of time.
Perfect.
spent a lot of time lying on that couch. Fell asleep on that couch 3 nights in a row just watching hoops, which it's really something that can't be beat. It became my lair for the couple days my wife and I stayed with them. But yeah, UConn was one of those teams where I am so impressed with how well they share the ball. Like, that ball is always moving. I think Andre Jackson looked like he has improved a ton as a decision-maker in the half court, which I think was a big emphasis coming into the year with, he's always been able to flash this sort of point-forward skill set. And if you look at Andre Jackson highlights from last season, you see so many flashy passes, but those were just kind of coupled in with maybe some untimely turnovers or not necessarily being the most reliable. And it looks like he's made a jump. You have Jordan Hawkins, who's looking like he has also made a leap. Like getting that progression from your 2 high upside guys is huge. But also the newcomers have been fantastic. Like Alex Caravan, I hope I'm saying his name right. But the stretch 4 who I think redshirted last year, and I mean he again feels like just one of those dudes who every time I see him taking a 3, it's gone in. He's shooting 37% so far, and it's like, how often do you hear of these high upside redshirt guys who just never pan out? And I know Hurley spoke highly of him to Doster for the ALMANAC, and it seems like he's immediately translating. Donovan Clingan being the MVP of the PK 85, that was unexpected, and I know I've been talking about the offense so far, but his contributions are just as important on defense. Like, guys literally cannot score over him. Like, he cannot be moved, and he just doesn't feel like one of the big, maybe he'll get exposed eventually throughout the season because I know he's still a freshman and hasn't really, weathered getting through that freshman wall. But it seems like he's more mobile or just has really good instincts, and it's not like he doesn't feel like a 7-footer who you're going to be able to exploit like you can with most freshmen who are that big or slow-footed, whatever it might be. So UConn is a team that, they feel Final Four good, national title good. They're all the way up to 4th on KenPom. So
yeah. I think you have to talk about Arizona, too, winning that loaded Maui with that loaded field. I know we're talking about them. They just went and lost on the road to Utah, which tells you a lot about conference play. And we'll see how things translate for Arizona in that game against the Utes. Shot poorly from the field, turned it over a lot. Didn't get great backcourt play, which was a question mark that we had about them before the season started. But in Maui, those guards played fine. Courtney Ramey played well. Looked like he fit in fine. Pelle Larsson came in and played well. But Omar Ballo and Tubelis down low, right now, that's the best front court in the country. The way that they run the court, how big they are, the touch they have about the rim, even out to about 10, 15 feet, like that duo inside is problematic for everybody. Add those two to the pace Arizona plays at and the way Tommy Lloyd likes to get out on the break. That's a problem for a lot of teams. Now, again, we'll see if that Utah loss ends up being a sign of things to come or just a blip on the radar. Assuming it's a blip on the radar, though, this is a team that handled pretty much everybody they played. Had some down spurts, but was able to kind of get what they wanted offensively. I don't think they're as explosive as they were last year. It's a different team that's more, again, front court focused. But you mentioned the Almanac before, it was the year of the big. Right? If it's the year of the big and you got the best front court, you got a pretty good chance.
Yeah, and I might be ignorant of this, so if there's any Arizona fans hearing this and I'm wrong on this, feel free to correct me. But what impressed me a ton about Tubelis in Maui, like he was making plays off the short roll. They were using him in ball screens. He'd find the open man rolling it when Kriisa got him the ball. And I just don't remember seeing that as much last year. And it's almost like, maybe Tommy Lloyd is just really good at finding unselfish, cerebral basketball players. But maybe some of it is like Kriisa in his passing acumen. Just that type of stuff is contagious on a basketball court. And I think it could be just as much where you have someone like Pelle Larsson who just as capably as Kirk Kriisa is able to throw a full court pass and transition and lead the break. And I think Tubelis and Ballo have been absolutely phenomenal, incredible at running the court. Like those dudes probably get at least 6 to 8 points just on rim running alone. We'll talk about this some with T.O., with some of my frustrations with Carolina when we get to the ACC Big Ten Challenge. But as someone who has gotten so used to seeing big men just get free for 6 to 8 points a game on rim runs, and I'm not seeing that right now, it makes me pretty envious and simultaneously impressed. And I know you've already waxed poetically about Ballo, but it still blows my mind. I wish we had Connor here to break this down, but he literally couldn't get on the floor for Gonzaga 2 years ago, and he's averaging 18 a game. It's insane. Well,
his body has changed. He's gotten to a point where he can run up and down the court the way Gonzaga wants to play, the way Arizona wants to play. Like this version of Omar Ballo would play at Gonzaga and would be running next to Drew Timme, which, whoa. But that wasn't there. And Tommy Lloyd was his guy, right? Tommy Lloyd was the one who recruited him, as the one who obviously brought him to Arizona. I think that transition was almost something of a wake-up call for Ballo. Like, I think Tommy Lloyd, I have no information on this, but I feel like Tommy Lloyd was like, you're going to come here and we're going to run, so we need you to do X, Y, Z. And he had guys ahead of him who, I don't want to say nobody at Gonzaga did that because I'm sure that's not true, but he saw what Koloko was doing. And Koloko was a very mobile big man, and so to compete with that in practice every day, I'm sure helped, right? There's also an easier, I don't want to say, there's an easier path to playing time, which can add some motivation, because you're not trying to go against Drew Timme.
Right.
And take Drew Timme's playing time. And that's no knock on Koloko and Tubelis, but, they're not Drew Timme. Mm-hmm. It's okay.
I think that's a great point, and it's, interesting just to think about how, he put his trust in Tommy Lloyd, and clearly it paid off. Shout out to Ballo for persevering through it, because, I think when he was at Gonzaga, I have a good friend who's a Gonzaga fan, and I remember when he committed, it was like, dude, we got this 7-foot unicorn kid from Mali, and,
Baby Shaq.
Yeah, and I just kind of assumed after those first, I guess he was at Gonzaga for 2 years, that he was just going to be like a 7-footer who never quite got it together and was never going to make an impact. And obviously he put the work in, and Tommy Lloyd is an incredible coach. we started figuring that out last year, but in case people forgot.
And some guys need to change the scenery. I was also really impressed with Creighton. I know Creighton did not win Maui, fell on the road at Texas this week in a really big game. But talking about guys who have fit in a new place, Baylor Shireman has been phenomenal. He had a rough shooting game against Texas, but I think he's given Creighton everything they could have wanted and more. He's that secondary playmaker, secondary rebounder, elite shooter who fits right into what Creighton wants to do offensively. To me, their ceiling is incredibly, incredibly high. That's a team that can make Final Four, can win the national championship. Certain things have to break right, and things have to happen. But they're a team that has that kind of potential. Was impressed with what Arkansas did. Not having Nick Smith, too, you kind of throw him in that mix. Mm-hmm. It's easy to think about how much better they could potentially be. It's always tough. We'll see if that comes to fruition. But and I know all three of those teams were Maui teams, but I just came away incredibly impressed watching those three teams play about how far along it seemed that they were already, especially compared to some of the other games we were watching. Mm-hmm. And then still, you talk about Nick Smith and the fact that each team is breaking in some transfers, potentially how much further they have to go was exciting as a basketball fan. Yeah, I think I can weigh in on Creighton first. You hit the nail on the head with Baylor Shireman. I mean, he's someone who I think making me think that those how guys play in the G League Combine, guys who test, is meaningless. Because, I mean, you were on some of the same text threads as me, Brian. We heard from people who were there who said he looked awful, and people who were, like, scouting it. And that really threw me off the scent. Like, when we were voting for our top 100 players for the ALMANAC, I was like, dude, I don't even know how to rank these Creighton dudes. I mean, Kalkbrenner first, but it's like, do I put Kaluma next? Do I put Alexander next? Do I put Nimhard next? They all had flashes. And it's like, oh, wait, and they also have this transfer coming in from South Dakota State who pretty much every power conference team reached out to, made contact with. And, yeah, the fact that he's translated so seamlessly, like, dude, in Maui, I'm surprised. Like, he didn't hit more than 4 threes in a game during Maui. He went 4 for 5 against Arkansas. It felt like maybe it's just because he took so many deep threes and was just swishing them. It felt like those deep threes should count in my mind as like 3 threes, you know? Like, yeah. And it was automatic. It was automatic. And the way Nemhard's making plays, Kalkbrenner down low, they're a dangerous team. Now, they did not make those threes against Texas. Mm-hmm. Shireman started 0 for 9. I think at one point, Creighton was 1 for 22 from 3. Which you got to give Texas a lot of credit. They're a team that has an elite defense, is a very experienced team, now has wins over Gonzaga and Creighton. And I know both those have been at home, but this is a Texas team that, number one at KenPom, might have the best 2 wins in the country. How can Texas win a national championship?
Yes, and I'm pretty in on this Texas team. It's like, but when you say the words out loud, it's like I can't imagine something that good happening to Texas.
It's scary.
Things that good haven't happened to Texas since Mac Brown was like young and spry and not
since fat. Vince Young was there.
Exactly. Coaching Vince Young. Oh,
yeah. Like the tough part with Texas, at least in terms of me getting fully on board with them, is that the shooting woes are still there. They're still not a good 3-point shooting team. They did great against Gonzaga, but if you've read Ralph Report recently, I have talked about how terrible Gonzaga's perimeter defense is, and I think Texas really just took advantage of that and a red-hot Tyrese Hunter game. But other than that game, they've been really bad shooting threes, and that's going to be a problem for them, I think, throughout the course of the season. They just don't have good shooters. And they play around that defensively in the way they attack the rim and get inside. But they won that Creighton game with their defense and then getting out in transition and getting to the rim. That's the recipe for success. Their talent and their experience should allow them to do that against most teams that they play. I would not be surprised if they won the Big 12 playing that way, particularly what we saw with Baylor this week, getting housed by Marquette. And Marquette's pressure defense, those guards just wilted for Baylor. So I think Texas can win the Big 12. But when you get into those one-game sample sizes in the NCAA tournament, if you need to make shots in a tight situation and you can't, I don't know. But I do think Texas certainly deserves to be in the conversation for potentially being the number 1 team in the country. I would still lean Houston, but I think Texas has a great case for that as well.
Yeah. I think with Texas, for some reason, I'm not overly concerned about their shooting, which this is what I've probably changed my tune the most on. Going into the season, I was thinking that, I didn't really want to see any more of Marcus Carr. He didn't win anything at Minnesota, put up big numbers, shot like 38% from the field, and didn't really put up numbers last year. Texas didn't win anything of note. Tyrese Hunter, for some reason, this is the biggest thing in hindsight. I'm like, why did we not pinpoint this? Like, everybody loves to talk about sophomore leaps, myself included, yet we all just are kind of like, oh, yeah, Tyrese Hunter, he's just going to be the same defensive pest, good passer, limited shooter. And he still, he
had one
right.
like awesome offensive game. That was it. He was one. It was in the NCAA tournament, so everyone got super excited about it. But he had like one awesome game.
And he's been incredible this year. He's been awesome. And so, like, even though he's, not the best shooter, Carr is streaky, Serge Rice, he'll hit him at like a 33% clip or something, it feels like Texas can hit them as an answer when they need to. Like even tonight against Creighton, when Creighton had a little bit of momentum, they got a big three from Jabari Rice. I think, Tyrese Hunter is going to be streaky, but let's say if he has one of those nights where he just can't miss again in the NCAA tournament, sometimes that's exactly what you need. And even beyond that, I think you touched on just what Texas is doing in transition. Right now, they currently rank 18th in the country in percentage of field goal attempts in transition. So they're able to rely on that a ton with being able to get out and run, which I think can help them compensate a little bit from being able to hit threes, because it's like if they are down through their pressure, they're able to get easy buckets in a hurry, even without being great shooters.
Mm-hmm. Brought up Baylor real quick. I want to make sure we touch on them before we jump into the ACC Big Ten stuff, because they're a team that experienced, has already been tested some of the season, and then got blasted by Marquette. Like, not even close. We're down 20, roughly 10 minutes into the game. Do you chalk that up as just kind of a one-off blip on the radar, flush the tape down the toilet and don't even worry about it? Or is it something that might be indicative of a bigger problem that Baylor has?
Maybe somewhere in between. I think, like, looking at the way Baylor's played this year, I mean, they've blown out who they're supposed to blow out. They handled their SWAC opponent, Mississippi Valley State, blew out Norfolk State, blew out McNeese State. Like, they did exactly what they were supposed to do against the sub-200 teams on Ken Palm. Got a great win in UCLA, which will end up being like a high Q1. And I know Virginia ended up pulling it out, but they made it close. It wasn't like they haven't really had an opportunity where Scott Drew can get them together and tell them, like, hey, y'all aren't hot stuff. Like, you haven't won anything yet. Whatever words Scott Drew uses. I know he's a man of faith. I don't know if he uses any dirty words in that, but they haven't had
some of the Phillip Rivers words.
Yeah, yeah. So like they haven't had any chances like that to where if it's their first bad performance, I wouldn't say it's overly concerning. Yet at the same time, being a defensive-minded team and this latest era of Baylor has been characterized by that menacing no-middle defense. It's been characterized by switchability and having the length to be able to recover quickly and contest shots, even when teams make skip passes or complete that on you. And to give up 1.4 points per possession to Tyler Kolek and Omax Prosper, who's never really been able to materialize that potential, that is a little bit alarming. I mean, Cam Jones is a bucket. He's going to get his 20. There's no shame in that. But, I mean, Tyler Kolek had 11 assists that game. He's getting paint touches. Yeah. Omax Prosper went off, hit 3 threes, shot, what was it? Like, I'm looking at it now, 9 for 12 from the field. That's where I'm wondering, the backcourt's a little bit undersized, relying so much on LJ Cryer, Adam Flagler, Keontae George. And I'm wondering if Jalen Bridges and Caleb Lohner are still kind of figuring out their place or figuring out exactly what Scott Drew wants from them defensively.
I think they probably are. The only red flag I think that comes up for me is the same question I had in the preseason about the guards. We know Flagler and Cryer are really high-quality secondary guards. Right. They've been that throughout their college careers. now they're being called on to be more of the lead guys and be in the lead role and have the ball more. Marquette pressured them into a ton of turnovers. They're the first team that really got under them and really pressured them. They did okay against Virginia's defense. They still turned it over 13 times in that game. The difference between the two, the Marquette game and the Virginia game, is that Keontae George had 20 points in the Virginia game. In the game against Marquette, he was really a non-factor, particularly early in the game when Marquette went off. He ended up with 12 points, but he also had 4 turnovers. Cryer had 3. Flagler had 3. That's 10 turnovers from your 3 guards. That's not good.
Yeah.
So if it turns out you're able to press this Baylor team and get them to turn the ball over, that's going to be a significant problem for them moving forward. Talk about Texas in the Big 12. If you let Tyrese Fennemark-Scar get after you, you're going to turn the ball over 10 times, just to those two. All right, same deal against Kansas. Same deal against Oklahoma State.
TCU. They
TCU.
got the same type of big body guards that can do the exact same thing.
Right. Now, experience group, still early. Keontae George is an extremely talented freshman who was only playing his 7th college game. Right? So I don't think that this is something that is, I'm going to say, is debilitating. Is going to keep them from doing anything they want to this year, because we don't know if that's the case or not. There's still plenty of time for that to happen. But if I'm a Baylor fan, this is the one area I've seen where it's like, okay, we need to make sure we're doing a little bit better here.
Yeah. And I think with Keontae George, he's also not like the elite athlete that a lot of top 5 lead guard prospects are. And I think, he could probably lean on that a little bit more to produce, to sort of compensate for the lack of experience. But that was where you think about, Baylor guards in the past. I don't think, Davion Mitchell, Jared Butler weren't especially explosive or anything, but they were old men on the court. Like Davion Mitchell was 22, 23 years old. He's able to handle stuff like that, and Keontae George doesn't necessarily have the athleticism to rely on, and at the same time he's still 18, and it makes sense that he's going to be prone to giving the ball up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and dive into the ACC Big Ten Challenge. That's been the big thing for the week, so let's dive into it.
And joining the Heat Check Hangout tonight for the first time is Terrence Oglesby, a.k.a. the Rifleman. You might recognize him from the Field of 68 After Dark, but he's someone who I enjoy talking ACC hoops with. Has a little bit of experience playing in the ACC, so Brian and we figured there's no one better to talk about the ACC Big Ten Challenge with than T.O. So how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. First of all, I want to make it absolutely and abundantly clear. I'm 2-0 in the Big Ten or ACC Big Ten Challenge. First against the Baby Boilers in Hummel, and then we went up to Illinois and beat the brakes off of them too. So that's important. So before we really dive into this, I'm 2-0. 2-0 here.
You got to let them know, T.O. You got to let them know. I appreciate you talking that talk and repping for the conference tonight. But, yeah, so we just want to get right into it. Let's start with even some of those overall storylines. Going into this week, the Big Ten have been looking a little bit more formidable than maybe a lot of us thought it would in the offseason. And ACC had been a little bit more down than I definitely expected. Brian, maybe you as well. But how have y'all's opinions changed, if at all, on either of these leagues throughout this challenge?
Not much. Not much. We knew there was going to be some struggle. We knew Louisville was going to be terrible coming into the year. That roster construction is pretty brutal, and really they just got through all their sanctions here pretty quick, so they were always going to be in a bit of a conundrum. If you look at what Chris Mack was going through, he could never get guys and kind of mold them to what he wanted to do because he was always waiting on the NCAA to figure shit out. Am I allowed to curse on here?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just not that much. Okay. So it took him a long time to figure things out. And because of that, he had to take a bunch of one-year guys, right? Carlick Jones. You look at some of these big-name transfers that he's taken over the past few years, and it's difficult. Now that there's some clarity with the NCAA, Kenny Payne's obviously going to be able to recruit at a different level. He just didn't do it at all this summer, which was mind-blowing because we thought, hey, this Louisville team needs guards. They decided not to get guards. So what happens, they've been getting their brakes beat in because they're playing Jalen Withers at the 2. That's going to happen. He played the 5 and made the all-freshman team. That's where we're at with Louisville right now. They're just out of sorts. Syracuse, same deal, playing 6 freshmen, significant minutes. That's a recipe for disaster when you go and play an Illinois team just built to break apart a 2-3 zone. That's tough. Coleman Hawkins is terrific. You put him in the high post, that's going to be tough. But by and large, I think it taught us, outside of the 3 bad teams that are in the ACC this year, and I think it's fair to say they're bad. I would throw Syracuse in that mix. I would throw Florida State in that mix. And I would throw, obviously, Louisville in that mix. Outside of that, yeah, Georgia Tech maybe. But okay, so there's 4 there. Outside of that, I think it's pretty good conference. But the problem that you're going to run into is the ACC. Now Florida State's going to get healthy. They're going to knock off some of those teams in the middle. It's going to look bad, right? Because when it comes to the selection committee and everything like that, like, those guys don't know hoop. They're sitting there looking at statistics. It's very black and white how that's going to work. Like, Clemson goes down to play at Florida State. That's a tough matchup if Florida State's really healthy. So that's going to make it really difficult for them. And they go down there and lose, it's considered a bad loss. So that's kind of where that goes. But as far as my opinion of the ACC, hasn't really changed much. It's a league that needs time because it deals with a lot of first-year players, a lot of transfers. And the Big Ten, it is what it is. They're going to be better at the beginning of the season typically. This year they don't have the top-end talent that they had last season. So by and large, they struggled more, and the ACC was able to get it. The talent's not as good this season in the Big Ten, and on top of that, I would say outside of Purdue and Illinois, they're pretty close to a finished product. That's the big thing with the Big Ten. There's just not as much there this season.
Indiana
Ralph,
fans probably jumping in right now to say, well, "What about us? What about us? What about us?" And I do think
I'll give them that too. Yeah.
See, I don't know. Like, I think beating UNC the way this UNC team is playing solidifies Indiana as being a good team, right? But I also think that game showed some of Indiana's flaws. Trace Jackson-Davis still can't do anything other than shoot a lefty jump hook, which he gets to whatever he wants to, but that's all he's got in his game. Jalen Hood-Schifino looks awesome. To me, that's the difference maker for Indiana being a good team versus some of the teams we've seen in the past. Ray Thompson provided some things. Xavier Johnson looked a little bit more under control. I'll take some positive things out of that for Indiana, but I think that game in particular was more about UNC and the continued struggles that they've had offensively, right? Because you're looking at those 2 teams as going into the season being the teams in each respective conference. I think Indiana is closer to the top, but I'm not going to go ahead and anoint them as being at the same level as what we've already seen from Purdue, or we've seen from Illinois, to your point, T.O., because I simply don't think UNC is putting up a worthy fight right now.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to get into Carolina just yet. I'm going to delay that and deflect as long as I can. I mean,
we can if we want. We can if we want, Riley. We can go down that deep, dark hole in a minute.
Please don't make me. Not yet. But, I mean, Xavier Johnson, you mentioned he looked more in control. He was cooking Carolina in middle ball screens, but everybody is cooking Carolina in middle ball screens right now. It's hard to know how much stock to put in that. But Hood-Schifino was someone who, I mean, I loved his tape at Montverde, thought he really could bring some of that athleticism, and at the same time, like, I thought in high school he made some really good reads and showed himself as, like, a cerebral player out there on the court, especially on the fast break and in transition. And I like what he's able to bring, but I'm with you, Brian, to where I'm not ready to say Indiana's definitively better than Illinois or definitively better than Purdue. Purdue's obviously who my opinion has changed the most on since the preseason, just with them showing that you have both Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith who have seemed like they need no time to adjust, which has been just an incredible coaching job by Matt Painter, getting those guys ready, and it just feels like a Matt Painter team that's just putting on an absolute clinic with their half-court offense, constant motion, sharing the ball. Like, it just seems like this roster fits him and what he wants to do more so than having Jaden Ivey did last year. But as far as, like, overall impressions besides the conference, I think I'm a little bit – I mean, I'm proud that the ACC showed out a little bit. I'm glad they got the win in the last one. I wasn't expecting that to happen, but Notre Dame was someone who impressed me. Virginia continued to play well. But, yeah, as a whole, I would say my biggest takeaway is that ACC might not be quite as down as we would have thought like a week or two ago.
No, I agree with that. And you were talking about those top 3 teams in the Big Ten. I would throw Michigan State at the bottom of that tier because they have old guys that are going to be able to compete, especially when they play somebody like a Purdue, right, to where they can throw multiple bodies at Zach Edey and just hopefully you can beat him up a little bit. I like Jalen Hood-Schifino where he's at Indiana simply because what he is a secondary ball handler for you with a level of explosion that can change the game or flip the game on its head, right? Like Miller Kopp, you know what he's going to do. Trace Jackson Davis, the lefty hook, like in college, if he's getting 18 and 12 on a lefty hook, that's fine. You're not going to hear me complain too much. Like Tyler Hansborough scored almost 8,000 points just jumping into people. It works in college.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
It works in college. Now, as far as his long-term potential goes, like it's going to limit him. He's a lot like his dad in that matter. Like very around the rim, going to play hard, extremely athletic. So he's going to be limited at the next level. But in college, not sure it matters as much. The most intriguing team in that league, to me, especially in terms of like making a deep run in the NCAA tournament, I feel like is Illinois, because you look at that team and they're so versatile in how they can attack you offensively. Underwood is finally, it's like the handcuffs are off, having to deal with Kofi Coburn, just this big center who can't do anything outside of 6 feet. And now you can see the best of what Underwood has to offer from an offensive perspective, right? They got a bunch of different guys who can score it. They're all versatile. They can, this little, the spread offense? Like, you can put different guys on that elbow and you can still manage to facilitate offense, even if Coleman Hawkins is playing the 3-4. And that's big time, guys. Like, that's a hard offense to guard anyway. And to be able to switch your positions up like that, I mean, they're going to be a load. And I think because they're so versatile, both offensively and defensively, quite frankly, I think that's what's going to bode well in the tournament. Because over the last few years, what we've seen is what wins in the Big Ten doesn't necessarily win in the NCAA tournament. Well, I think this team is talented enough and geared for the NCAA tournament more than the Big Ten, but I think they're going to make it work anyway.
Yeah, and you mentioned all that about Illinois without even touching on that they got Dane Danger, who allows them to go big if they need to. Like, he's someone who's
Eli Thomas 2.0. You guys know who that is. Who played at Clemson. He's kind of the same body type, quick feet, little jump hooks, plays with an edge, like not overly athletic, but athletic enough. I think he's very similar to Eli Thomas in my mind.
I knew him more as Elijah Thomas. That dude gave... took me a second, but he... I was like...
You got to call that man by his government, because he had some great games.
Dude, he gave Carolina fits. I remember watching Eli Thomas when he was at Clemson. That dude was a beast. But yeah,
he's a good player.
With Danger, I love that he gives him that versatility, but you also, like you mentioned, the performance that Coleman Hawkins had the other night, putting up a triple-double, and... we all have interactions a lot with Sleepers Media. Greg Waddell was someone who was beating the Illinois drum all off season and getting me his love for the Illini rubbed off on me. And Coleman Hawkins, he mentioned how they were going to be positionless, and Greg didn't really buy it. But we've seen through 3 or 4 weeks into the season, that's exactly what they've become. And I also got to mention
he's on the Illinois train because Underwood asked if he could kiss his feet at the Final Four. I don't know if you guys saw that or not, but Underwood saw him wearing an Illinois jersey because he knew B-Wood was going to be there, so he wore an Illinois jersey. He goes, "Let me kiss your feet." It kind of threw us all for a loop. That's the only reason Waddell's on that train. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good, but I'd be remiss to not even. Yeah, I don't know how to get us back together after that one, but I'll try. But Illinois freshmen, not just like Sky Clark, who obviously has the highest pedigree, but what they're getting out of Sincere Harris off the bench, and Jaden Epps is in the main event. I know we're talking Big Ten ACC Challenge, but in the main event 2 weeks ago, I felt like every time Jaden Epps took a big shot, it went in. And I had to keep. I was like, is this dude a freshman or is he a transfer or something? And so the fact that they're getting this production from holistically has been really impressive.
Who did they play in the main event? Just because I know the games, I don't know which one was that. There's so many MTEs.
They beat Virginia for the championship, and they beat Illinois in the round before.
They lost to Virginia. Virginia beat.
Oh, my bad. Yeah. They beat UCLA the round before.
And is Jaden Epps is a Virginia kid, correct? Like he's a team loaded kid.
That sounds right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Team-loaded Virginia kid, so that was a big game for him. No, he's solid. He was ready to go. He was ready to go from day one. He's got this big physical body. Like, sometimes it takes some guys longer than others, and the physically mature 6'3", 6'4s, they typically get there quicker, and he kind of fits that mold a little bit.
Well, let's go ahead and transfer over to Virginia then. Talk about the Cavaliers, because they've been, I think, one of the biggest surprises of the first month of the season. Had a tough test in Ann Arbor against Michigan, answered that. Tio, what's different about them this year? Because it's the same cast back. Is it just another year playing together?
I feel so. I feel that's the big thing. Reese Beekman and Caden Shedrick, in my mind, last season, they were a year away. And I said that several times. Like, Reese Beekman has all the talent in the world. He needs time to figure it out and use those tools. And guys, like, playing for Tony Bennett's not easy. Like, you have to completely slow yourself down. It's not a 3-day process where you just like, okay, I got it. Like, for example, Armand Franklin, who's shooting, he was bad yesterday, but he's shooting like 40% from three this year. Last season, he was in the low 20s or mid-20s or whatever he was. It takes a second to kind of get into that gear where you're giving everything you have on defense, and then you just walk down on offense and find shots. A lot of guys are rhythm guys, so it takes a second to kind of reverse engineer what you've always done. Because Armand Franklin was a Mean Streets kid. Like, he played with Mean Streets Elite. Like, those guys are flying. And he wasn't necessarily like that. Like, he played at Indiana under Archie. They played a little bit, not that much faster, but a little bit faster. Right. And it's like, it takes a second for those guys to get a grip. I think he's a factor. And Caden Shedrick has always been talented, but it's taken him a second to get going. But I'm telling you guys, the biggest factor in my mind is Reese Beekman. And him having the ball in his hands a little bit more and putting Kihei off the ball more, like, it gives them a different amount of ability to put pressure on the rim, because he's so fast and he takes such long steps, and he's just extremely athletic. I mean, you saw it. He went down. He had a guy on his hip. He holds that guy off, takes off one leg, and then dunks on the other guy also.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like,
I'm pretty sure Joey Baker was guarding him on that one. I was like, not a good idea.
Well, they're used to driving by him, but I digress. There's another guy there still. But, like, the fact of the matter is like, that is really strong to do, to have somebody riding your hip and still be able to get up off the ground. Like, that takes serious strength, serious athleticism, and really the fortitude to, like, be like, I'm going to dunk this thing right beside the big house in a crazy environment. Like, I'm going in there. And he has that bravado about him now after a year of kind of figuring it out, to where, in my mind, it's Reese Beekman's team, and he can take them, in my mind, to the Final Four.
He keeps playing like that, and they get enough offense. I think I'm with you. Duke has those expectations. I think are still getting the pieces together. It seems like Drake Whitehead's been injured. Dirk Lively has been injured. They're still trying to figure out how to play with each other, and John Shire's still trying to figure out his own coaching style as well. What have you seen from Duke that either you like or maybe you don't like?
I like what I've seen out of Jeremy Roach, to be honest. A lot of people were kind of doubting, like, is he going to be able to be that guy? I think he's proven so far that he's capable of being that guy. Now, is it going to be an every evening thing? Like, we don't know. But at the same time, I feel like the roster that Shire has put around him fits him perfectly, for him to be able to put some pressure on the rim, and Derek Lively to be able to step out and knock down shots. Filipowski's better than everybody thought, so that changes the game big time. And, you know, you have to like their roster construction. I like what Shire did with bringing some of these older pieces in, right? Like, sometimes, like, culture's a big thing, and he brought in some academic kids along with Grandison coming from Illinois that, like, understand the importance of doing things together. And that's a hard thing to kind of bring in the mix whenever you've been living on one and dones for a long time. You have to have guys. You have to have guys that can establish a culture with you and understand what it takes to win. And Ryan Young doesn't understand what it takes to win, but he knows the right things to say because he's been in Northwestern for a long time. So I like we lost our man here. We lost our man.
We did,
but
he'll be jumping back in.
Gotcha. But I like their roster makeup. I think mid-February you're going to start to see the best version of Duke, and a team that could potentially compete for an ACC championship or ACC tournament championship. They have that kind of upside. How Shire is going to be able to put them together is obviously huge.
Yeah. I think the key for them is going to be some outside shooting.
Yeah.
Was doing some research for an article I was writing. They played 5 games in Cameron. In those 5 games, they're shooting about 37% from 3. Certainly a respectable number. The 4 games they've played neutral site, Champions Classic, and then out PK Invitational, they're shooting 18% from 3. Anytime they're away from home, it's bad. And they got some good shooters on the team. Again, Whitehead's getting up to speed. Tyrese Proctor hasn't really hit his stride yet, but I agree. I think you get them into the season, get them in January, February, you'll start seeing that talent really come to fruition.
So keep in mind, those are big time environments too that they've played in.
Oh, absolutely.
That throws that many freshmen in, and you're starting a 5-man who transferred from a Northwestern team that couldn't sniff 500. So let's keep in mind, he came in supposed to be a backup, and then these guys get hurt. They get healthy. I mean, they're top 5 talented. It's just a matter of can those guys come together.
And they're big too. You don't see many teams playing those 2 bigs, but Filipowski being able to have him out there and stretch the floor, I think allows them to do that.
That's right. And Proctor, he's come up. He's been good. He's still so freaking young, though. I mean, he hasn't. That's part of the good and part of the bad is the fact that these Dukies they don't know what they don't know, right? They're still learning everything on the fly, and sometimes when you play on the road, you have to find a way to get easier shots to start the game. If you can get the first shot of the game to be an easier one, you can usually kind of fall in the motion of the game, right? That was always a huge thing for me, especially after the first half of my freshman year. I started to realize if my first shot was a good one, and it didn't have to go in, but I had to have a good look at it. I had to have my feet set. I could set a tone and kind of fall in. Yeah, and fall into the game, right? I know that sounds a little bit kind of cheesy, but if you fall into the game and just kind of let things happen, makes it easier, and that's harder to do when you're playing in big environments away from the house.
Does UNC let things happen?
No, they're forcing it. They're just jamming it down your throat, and it's not working for them either. Square peg, round hole. And
they're so painful to watch offensively. They don't move. They don't move the ball. It's entirely different than what they ran the end of the year last year, too. It baffles me. I didn't think Brady Manick, losing him, was always going to be a big impact, but I didn't think it would completely, shut down their offense.
Here's the thing about Brady Manick that goes underrated is the fact that he would tell everybody to shut up. Is Pete Nance that guy to tell everybody to shut up? Let's run what we're supposed to run. And if we do that, we'll find shots. This team... it's frustrating because Indiana's a very good defensive team, so I don't want to take any credit away from them because they made everything difficult. Even when Carolina was trying to run some things, Indiana was deflecting balls, left and right. They tried to make entry passes. And, even when they tried to run stuff, it was still really difficult for them because they were just – it was just fundamentally unsound. And it made it difficult for them to get anything outside of a high ball screen. And that's just not how Carolina has ever played. And last season when they began to figure something out, they would set a step-up ball screen on the side, and RJ would kind of set off a chain of events. This year it's just Spain action or 5-fist. That's all it is. And it's really boring to watch, and it's a discredit to what Carolina's always been. And that is a team with a lot of talent, a team that shares the ball, and a team that plays with pace. And I just don't understand the positive aspect of giving Caleb Love the ball at the beginning of the clock. If you get towards the last 10 seconds, find him on the wing, run a ball screen, let him be him. That's the ultimate luxury. But the problem, the other side of that coin is if you don't let other guys touch it, other guys are going to stink because there's no rhythm. And so what ends up happening is he might get 30, and he might shoot 40 times. But, the rest of the guys, they touch it every 4th time down. You know how pissed off I would be, guys, if I was a corner shooter and, I had to play defense 6 times in a row without touching the rock? Dude, you might as well sub me out. It doesn't make any sense.
It's kind of what we're getting from Baycott, it feels like.
I'd be pissed if I was Armando Bacot. I'm getting paid all this NLI money or NIL money or whatever it is to come back to Carolina and be a dude, and I'm touching it. I'm getting 10 shots a game while one dude's getting 40. And not to beat a dead horse, but this was the same thing with Cole Anthony. Get these guys to give up the freaking ball. I don't know what it is the last 3 years with Carolina. They just can't seem to do it. But the problem, the most frustrating thing is R.J. Davis, Caleb Love, and Armando Bacot are potentially the best 3 players on a single team in the country when they're playing well. But it's like they're not buying in. And it's a strange thing to watch.
Yeah. Riley, since we got you back now, what has been your biggest issue with UNC this year? I know it's probably tough for you to talk about, but we're a little bit into this now. What have you seen as the biggest problem?
And do you cry yourself to sleep every night, right? Do you cry yourself to sleep?
I do not cry myself to sleep, but oftentimes I wake up around 5 or 6 a.m.
I was worried about your emotional well-being.
I find myself waking up at 5 or 6 a.m. and just lying in bed and thinking about the latest game that Carolina has lost. That's enough. We don't have to go down that road. I got a counselor to talk about that with. But my biggest frustration is I told T.O. this earlier today. I feel like UNC literally is doing nothing well right now. They're getting fouled a lot. They're drawing contact. That's literally the only thing that they've been doing well. Last night, for example, you had Pete Nance absolutely cooking Race Thompson in the high post. He scored 7 straight points. Didn't go back to that. You had Leaky Black. He attacked Miller Kopp off the dribble and airballed a floater, which got a good look. One of the few looks Carolina got that entire game. Yet for some reason we didn't go back to attacking Miller Kopp. Sorry to say we. I get a little passion here. I'll try to go back to being unbiased.
No, that's
journalist,
fine.
But
I get it.
It's okay.
But
that's what makes college basketball great, man. I had a text message exchange with somebody today from Tennessee, and people just get in it, man. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
This is what it's why we get to do what we do. Is because of the passion of everybody, and I'm happy that you have it, Riley. That's what makes it fun, right? It's awesome. Carolina fans are insane.
I told Mike Miller, our editor for the Field of 68 Daily, because I write Monday's edition, and I literally had to go from watching UNC lose a game in 4 overtimes to writing 2,500 words on the weekend. It's dude, this sucks after watching your team.
That's
lose.
a rough day.
But yeah, I think it's frustrating to see. Last year, I thought down the stretch what Hubert did so well was find matchups and exploit them. I think back to the 2 Duke games in particular. If you watch the tape from that game in Cameron, they repeatedly put Paulo or they put Mark Williams in a high ball screen, and R.J. Davis just spazzed on everybody and could not be stopped. Caleb Love had some good passes out of that, too, some good reads to Armando. There's a really famous picture of the dunk from Armando with Caleb, after giving him the assist, sticking his tongue out, running back on the court. That was an example of that. Is kind of what sealed it. And that just seeing, I know T.O. touched on a lot of this. The ball movement's been terrible. Defense has been frustrating as well. I know I kind of joked about Indiana cooking Carolina and middle ball screens, something that I thought why I didn't really buy into the March run being a fluke was I thought Carolina figured something out with the way they defended ball screens down the stretch last season. And I think, for the record, defending ball screens
the ball
was an
pressure
issue.
was better. The ball pressure was better.
Right.
They're working harder to get over screens. They're just sitting in them now.
Mm-hmm.
And to go along with what you said, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Riley, but I got to leave in 2 minutes. So, but another thing too is you talked about them putting RJ in ball screens with Paolo and attacking him then. Well, here's the difference between RJ whenever he was coming off and what Caleb Love's doing now. RJ was getting past that initial line of defense, and he was scoring some, sure, but for the most part, he was drawing help and finding other guys and giving them opportunities to play. That's the biggest difference now. You said, a high ball screen. There's a couple times, Puff Johnson's wide open. P. Nance is wide open. And Caleb Love, I don't know if he's playing with blinders on or not. He ain't giving it up. And part of that is his responsibility, and part of that, guys, his teammates too. There's a couple of times they ran a nice little what do the NBA guys call it? A dribble handoff with a screen in front, a zoom action. So they run a nice zoom. Everybody calls it something different. I was just talking to Dayton about a certain play that they ran. It was very similar, but they ran kind of like a zoom action, and Dunn gets the ball around the corner, gets to the right elbow. He can't be more open. And what does he do? He picks his dribble up and finds Caleb Love on the opposite 45 and skip passes it back to him. That's an issue. Mm-hmm. And that is where it's like, hey, if that shot comes open in practice, you better freaking shoot it or else you can't play with me.
Well,
right? I think there's a lot of different things going into it. It's not just Caleb Love's fault because his teammates have to hold him accountable. But at the same time, like, his teammates get opportunities. They have to take those opportunities as well. And I feel like they're just very reliant on those guys right now.
Mm-hmm.
Tio, before you go, real quick, does Clemson make the tournament?
Oh, my God.
PJ Hall, let the people know.
It's going to be very close.
Let the casuals know how good PJ Hall is.
PJ Hall's very good, and he finally started his first game. If he's healthy, they have a shot. And another thing too is you know, Brownell and Dick Bender, head assistant coach down there. Dick Bender, great name. They do a terrific job of scheduling, so they get a lot of wins that people don't realize are really good wins. Like, I have their Towson game with Valley Sports here in the next few days, and like, Towson's pretty close. If they don't win the CAA, they're going to be right there. Like, that's an underrated win if they win it. If they win it. Like, they play Loyola Chicago, who just changed conferences, might be a little difficult, but still, like, that could be a valuable win. So, like, they're going to put themselves in the position to be successful. Now, are they going to win enough games in the ACC for that to happen? That's the big thing. I think they're going to be on that bubble. I've been pretty consistent in saying that. I think they're going to be on that bubble. It could very well come down to 3 possessions. That's the crazy part. Like, three key possessions at the end of 3 key games, and that's how close I think they are. So I did not answer that, and I'm not going to.
Bubble is fine. We'll accept that.
Yeah, appreciate you guys. Do I just log off here? How does this work? I'm just gonna let you.
You just log off. You're good.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I know I tend to ramble, but anytime you need me, just give me a ring.
Sounds good, man. Appreciate it, Tio.
See you guys.
The ACC Big Ten Challenge was obviously the big games of the week. I know we had the Big East, Big 12 battle as well, and we touched on the big matchups from there. This weekend's slate is a little bit lighter. You have conference championship games in college football, NFL Sunday. That's going to be the case. But the big game, Riley, is the game in London between Michigan and Kentucky. I think it's an important proving ground for both. Both still have high expectations, but both have shown some warts. What are you looking for from that game?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, can Kentucky get some of those perimeter guys going who haven't necessarily showed up in the bigger matchups, with Antonio Reeves and C.J. Frederick both sort of being no-shows at Gonzaga. I think they both had decent games against Bellarmine. Not going to put a ton of stock into that, but Michigan's perimeter defense has been so lackadaisical. If you watch that Virginia game that we touched on a little bit with T.O., like, there are times where it looked like just a layup line, guys getting free off the screen and roll, whether that was the big, whether that was the guard. And so I want to see if Kentucky can expose that and get some of those, get those 2 transfers on the wings to put in a high-level game against power conference competition and against a team that we think will be in the NCAA tournament. What about you, Brian?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing Hunter Dickinson, Oscar Tshiebwe, obviously that matchup. But both, kind of to your point, both teams need something from the perimeter to be the team that we expected them to be in the preseason, or hope they could be in the preseason, right? Looks like Jet Howard could be that guy for Michigan, but he needs to be more consistent. Kason Wallace has shown flashes for Kentucky, particularly defensively. That battle, the Jet Howard, Kason Wallace, I don't know if they'll be matched up or not, or how often they will be. But that's one to me where it's like, that's where the game is going to be decided. We've talked about this with Severe Wheeler, because Severe Wheeler is Kentucky's perimeter guy, but he's not somebody who's going to score for you. He's not going to create his own shot. His goal is to get somebody else a good look, which is good. That's what you need, except when you get in situations where you need a bucket from somebody on their perimeter. Kentucky didn't have that last year. That's why they fell apart down the stretch when games got closer, more intense. Wallace is the only guy who's really shown that potential this year, and I think this is another chance for him to really step up and be that guy.
Yeah,
we got conference play.
I was just going to say the way we talk.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
I'll jump into conference play.
The way we talk about Kentucky and the way I feel about Kentucky is like that's got to be the lowest I've felt about a top 5 KenPom team in a while. And it seems like Kentucky fans sort of share some of that angst just with the loss to Michigan State, the loss to Gonzaga, getting played evenly with Bellarmine in the first half, to where it's like they still have all the pieces. The predictive metrics still loves them, but it feels like they really need this win. Whereas maybe Michigan, like I'm sure they could use a statement win. I guess they've kind of been pushed by some mid-major teams as well, but at least Michigan has the youth excuse where they're still, they're relying a ton on Jet Howard. They're still getting Doug McDaniel acclimated and everything. But, yeah, I feel like that Kentucky needs this win more, and I do think Kentucky's a better team. I would probably lean going with Kentucky in this game. But
yeah, Michigan's close contest against Eastern Michigan is now looking worse and worse, considering Eastern Michigan just picked up their second win of the season. They are 2-6.
Nice.
Monty Bates and Company almost beat Michigan, which is
Mac Darlings.
Hey,
hang the banner, Monty.
Just get hot in March, right? Conference play started for a lot of conferences this week. That's going to continue in this weekend with some higher profile matchups. At least on your TV, we there are not the top end real big ranked matchups, Riley. But are there any games you're really looking forward to following or interested in this weekend?
Yeah, I think Oregon at UCLA is an interesting one. Just I don't know what the status of the Ducks' health is, but should be. I mean, I honestly expect I expect UCLA to put the hurt on Oregon a little bit, but I don't know if they are healthier getting into it. Now would be the time for them to start to get right, or to maybe unleash Kalel Ware a little bit more. Love to see what he could do maybe against a Dembona and that UCLA front court, but yeah, it won't. That's happening this upcoming Sunday.
Yeah, I'm looking at 3 on Saturday. You have the Marquette Wisconsin game, which is always fun, that intense in-state rivalry. You may not want to watch Wisconsin play because it's not the most appealing style, but they're again playing at a pretty high level, or at least over expectations. And Marquette has to follow up with it against Baylor. Is that legit, or was that just a one-off thing? Mm-hmm. I'm interested in Indiana going to Rutgers and playing Rutgers in Piscataway because Indiana should win that game. But this is a game the last couple of years Indiana has lost, particularly to Rutgers, has lost because they have not been tough enough, have not been physical enough. Excited to see that test. And then night game, 9:30 o'clock ESPN2 on Saturday after a lot of football's done. St. Mary's in Houston. St. Mary's is one of the better mid-majors in the country. They've played a lot of really good teams already. This is going to be not the biggest test Houston has played, but it will be one of the biggest tests that they've played so far this season. Another chance to see the number one team in the country tested. I think that's one that certainly I'll be tuning into. And if you're up at 9:30 at night, which you should be, and you're not doing anything else, get your stretchy pants back on and watch that game.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say it's Houston's biggest test. I mean, I know I mentioned Oregon, but they beat an Oregon team that was down some of their important players. Guys are still getting healthy for the Ducks to where, I don't know, I feel like personally, I feel like St. Mary's is a much tougher matchup than Oregon, just what they can do defensively. I know they're coming off of 2 tough losses against Washington in overtime and against New Mexico, which, granted don't look great, but they still have the 9th best defense in the country for KenPom. They're crashing the glass, taking care of that, really making it tough to score around the basket. And I mean, I know Houston has plenty of shot creators and guys who can, they have guards who can get buckets, but with how much they rely on the offensive glass contrasted to St. Mary's, who's really controlling the defensive glass, that's going to be an interesting way to see, who ends up winning that matchup.
The next 3 Saturdays for Houston: St. Mary's, Alabama, Virginia. We'll know a lot about Houston. We'll know a lot about Houston in the next 3 weeks. Those are some fun. Now, they played North Florida and NC-A&T in there as well, but we'll know a lot more about Houston, I think, in 2.5, 3 weeks than certainly we do right now.
Did you mention they're going to Charlottesville, too? That's
Yes.
an incredibly hard place to play.
Yeah, and they get Alabama too at Houston. What you remember last year in Tuscaloosa was like the game of the year.
Yeah, that game was
also, I
awesome.
think the last game Marcus Sasser played, or was it Tremont Mark?
It was Sasser was the last one. For
It
him.
was Sasser, yeah. Hopefully we get another game like that because that was a lot of fun. But that'll do it for this episode of the Heat Check Hangout. Thank you guys very much for listening or watching. You can watch us on YouTube. Obviously, we come to you in audio form via anywhere you listen to podcasts. Make sure you rate us. Do all the things you do for every podcast and everything every podcast tells you to do because that helps us. So if you could do that, tell a friend. Obviously, we very much appreciate it. From our co-host, Riley Davis, I'm Brian Ralph. Thank you very much for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.
Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball, college. Come on. Basketball, college. Basketball, college. Whoa, basketball, college.